Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I'm Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter at Hawk Blogger, as well as on Instagram at Hawk Blogger, as well as we try to grow that part of our little family. Would love a follow there. I think we've got like a couple hundred followers on Instagram. It's pretty pathetic, but would love to see some folks start following there. I am definitely posting highlights, clips, reels, and also the live show. In some cases is live there as well. It is a gorgeous Saturday. I don't know if anyone's going to tune into this show, at least live. And I almost, I hope people do, because I always like having folks to talk to and keeping the conversation going. But I almost hope you don't. I almost hope you're out there enjoying it, because, man, I just got back from just a one-day whirlwind trip. I went down to Portland to see a Pearl Jam concert with my buddies and drove back this morning after getting in late. And for the first time ever, I took my wife's advice. My wife is someone that when she travels, she's the person that on her Apple Maps or Google Maps app has avoid highways turned on. So she takes the longest possible routes. She takes a route down to Portland that involves no highways and takes like 6.5 hours. And I almost thought about doing that yesterday, but instead I really felt like driving east. I love the central part of the state. I love driving over the pass. And so I drove east on 90, and then I cut down through Yakima, and it was gorgeous. It ended up being 5.5 hours total, but on the way down, I stopped at the Columbia River Gorge Hotel, had lunch, sitting there looking over the gorge, which was great. And on the way back, I actually took a longer route. I drove around Mount Hood because I found a restaurant. I wanted to find a good brunch place in some little mountain town. I found some place that was known for its biscuits, and it looked amazing, and the reviews were great. So I'm going to give a plug to, I got to make sure I get this right, because I said it before. It's Baseline Biscuits is the name of the place. And it's in a little town. It says it's in Mount Hood, Oregon, but I think it's actually, I think the town is called something else. Like when I was driving through there, it had a name, Parkdale. Yeah, Parkdale is what it was called. But Baseline Biscuits, highly recommend. They also, in the same place, is Mount Hood Creamery, so you can get amazing ice cream there as well. But what a gorgeous part of the world we live in. And on a day like today, the last 2 days, it's been great. I did miss the Northern Lights. I did miss them. So I didn't get to see what so many other people got to see, which was a bummer, but did enjoy the Pearl Jam concert last night. It was great getting back with my buddies and talking with them. And one of them told me he listens to HB Mornings every once in a while, which was a shock to me, but that made me smile. And it's just cool knowing, and you never know who's listening on the other end with these things. I just talk into a computer and get some chat here. I do see a few folks in chat. Misfit74, hey there. A pretty consistent person in our show. And Rick R, a YouTube member, says hello. Hello to you, Rick. Today, I want to keep the streak going. I think this is 48 straight days streaming, and I want to see how many days in a row. I love a good streak, so we're going to keep pushing it. And the topic today is really some mailbag questions. There's one of the benefits of being a YouTube member is if you are a club level or a suite level YouTube member, you are either able to ask questions live in the chat, which you can do today, or I posted in our community section of the YouTube channel a post where people could reply in that thread with questions and ask there. So we have, I think, at least one question there. I also wanted patrons to be able to ask questions. So patreon.com/hawkblogger. They are also able to ask questions. I posted a thread there. A few questions came up. So I'm going to answer those questions first. And then, you know me, I tend to take little winding routes around topics. finding that draft guide that we looked at, was it yesterday, about the cornerbacks, made me curious about some of the other rookies and what advanced stats we might find from them. So I might drive us in that direction, but it kind of depends on how long all these questions go. But encourage folks, if you are not a YouTube member already, please join. The link is in the chat. It's pinned there, or it's in the description of the video. And you want to be a club level or a suite level YouTube member, and that gets you the opportunity to ask questions live. Hawks fan Matt Man is one of those members and one of those club or suite level members. So he has gotten a lot of opportunity to ask questions, which is great, and he takes advantage of it. And that's the whole point. So happy to address those today. And why don't we get started with our YouTube members? And I will look at what questions were potentially put up today. I think there was only one on YouTube. And this comes from Joey Tesla. He asks, Brian, will you be able to attend training camp this year and share your thoughts? Really missed that the last couple of years, but totally understand you had other stuff going on personally and professionally. Yeah, I've been thinking about this. What I will say about going to training camp is I'll say a few things. One, I used to really appreciate it when there was really high quality coverage of training camp by beat reporters, and you get a lot of details around different plays, players that were standing out, how people were handling themselves on the field and drills, all that kind of stuff, and just kind of helping to recreate the atmosphere or help you imagine what was going on there, and also just players to pay attention to. And I don't feel like that kind of coverage has been quite as high quality for the last maybe decade. And so when I went there and started to go on my own and share notes and take notes, I felt like I was going to cover it the way I wanted it to be covered. And I will say that I'm pretty proud of my notes from those camps, because I can go back and look at my training camp write-ups the day after, the first day of training camp in 2010 or 2011 or 2012. And a lot of the things that I saw that were not being written about elsewhere came to fruition. And players that other folks were maybe not as high on or were higher on. I mean, I remember so many people were pissed at me for saying Gary Jennings was not going to make the team, and he did not make the team. There's a number of people that were skeptical about what I was writing about Brandon Browner and Richard Sherman back in the day. So I do take pride in it, and I appreciate that other folks have gotten a lot of feedback that some people discovered the blog and the show that way. So I always like doing it. A couple things have changed. One, I used to get access in a way that allowed me to skip going on the bus and just getting right to the VMAC and basically friends and family kind of access. And they've changed, not that I don't get friends and family access, but the lot that they used to use for friends and family has now been closed. It's being used for construction, or it's been repurposed. And so basically everybody has to take, other than true friends and family, have to take the bus. And so that adds a lot of time for me to make it work. And the more time it takes, the less potential that I can make the time for it. So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is, honestly, I just started being bored. It stopped being interesting. I don't think that there was a lot of things for me to pick up there. I didn't feel like the team was worth my effort in that, to be totally honest, in that regard. Last year, I think I went to the first practice, maybe one of the first practices, and I sat there baking in the sun thinking, God, why am I not on a golf course? I'd rather be golfing. And so I just kind of wrote it off. But I will say, given the way things are right now, I am very curious about attending, and I have not reached out to my contacts there to see if I can make that happen. I'm going to assume that I can if I want to, but not sure. So I guess the very long answer to your question, which is I think I will be going this year. I'm not sure. I'm not positive, and I'll let you all know when I get more clarity. And I don't know if I'll be going to all of them the way that I have in some past years where I just really try to cover it day to day. Or if I'll just pick a few select practices to go to. The other thing that no one's said anything about yet, but I think is worth mentioning, we don't know if they're going to open it to public this year. That was a Pete Carroll thing. It was not always open to the public. And this is a new regime. They may not do that. That is a thing. So we have to find out if that's even an option. I think it'll be really interesting if they don't do that. I think there'll be a pretty big reaction. I think they'll feel pressure to open it up. I just don't know if that's the way Mike McDonald wants things run. But that's part of why I do want to attend, is because I think Mike McDonald, he will do things differently than Pete Carroll. There will be things to notice about camp that have nothing to do with the players and just the way that camp's being run, the way that coaches are interacting, and there might be more to pick up or different things to pick up. So yeah, I would like to try to go. Not sure exactly how that'll play out, but I appreciate the question and I appreciate that you are interested in it. All right. A little bit of news before I get to the next round of questions. If you didn't see this, it's been reported that Johnny Newton, who was selected by the Commanders in round 2, who had been battling a foot injury, and I think he'd had surgery on it prior to the draft, and that kept him from doing some of the testing and combine stuff that normally would be done, and maybe contributed to him slipping out of the first round. It's been reported that he is going to be going, he's going to undergo surgery to repair an injury to the other foot. This is about 4 months after he had the same type of procedure on his right foot. So that's a bummer for Commanders fans. He was seemed like a pretty big steal for them in the second round, and certainly is going to affect his readiness for the season, even just training and getting into prep. I don't know beyond that, but I thought that was interesting news and unfortunate for Johnny Newton, and hopefully, not the type of news we're going to hear about any Seahawks. All right, so now we're going to move into patron questions. And if you're just joining, this is a mailbag episode, so I'm going to be going through YouTube members' questions first. And if you're a YouTube member and you have not asked a question on the thread that I posted in our community section, you can ask a question in chat. As long as you're a club level or suite level YouTube member, you can ask a question in chat, and I will answer that. And then the other is patron questions. So patreon.com/hawkblogger if you want to join as a patron. The YouTube membership is right in there. All right. First question comes from Colin L. He says, not explicitly Seahawks related, but maybe. What are your predictions for the next 5 Super Bowl champions? P.S. Pearl Jam is awesome. That's true. Pearl Jam was a lot of fun last night. I enjoyed the show. I have to say, I don't love the latest as much as everybody else, and they played a lot of their new stuff. And if I was in a band and I'd played my old stuff a trillion times, I'd absolutely play the new stuff. But as a fan, there's a couple. They never play State of Love and Trust anymore, or at least I never heard them play that live. I'd love to see them play that live. I'd love Rearview Mirrors, another one. I haven't seen them play that one live. They do a live every time. We saw Even Flow. That was cool once. Like some of their great songs, but there's some other greats that I don't think that they play quite as often. All right, so Colin's question: list your predictions for the next 5 Super Bowl champions. I would be lying if I said I've really got any predictions for the next 5. I mean, I think it's fair to assume the Chiefs are the favorite until they're not. I know the 49ers are technically the favorite for this year. They're the most talented team. They do not have the best player, and ultimately that's what decided the game last year. And the Chiefs should be better this year. Now, Rashee Rice and his whole situation, maybe that'll affect some things. We'll see if Xavier Worthy is a great addition or not. But it's just hard to bet against. It's hard to bet against Patrick Mahomes, period. And now Andy Reid signed his extension, so he'll be around for a little bit longer. And I think that defense is going to continue to get better. They drafted Jaden Hicks, even though I was really hoping that they would in Seattle. So, I mean, Patrick Mahomes isn't going anywhere. I think he's the favorite, and the Chiefs are the favorite every year until they're not. I think we are in a Michael Jordan, Tom Brady kind of period of time in the NFL where in any given year, the expectation is there is a team that's going to win it. The same team. So yeah, that's kind of where I would start. I think if you want a little bit more interesting answer, I guess, depending on what you think is interesting, I think the teams that are best positioned to rise into that true contender status for a Super Bowl, I think the Lions are one to watch. I think the Packers are one to watch. I mean, the Bills are always one to watch because of Josh Allen, although I just have some questions about, I think their talent level has drained quite a bit. And the Ravens were great last year. I don't know if they're going to be able to recreate it. So I think those are the teams I would probably call out as other guys that could, other teams that could potentially rise up. All right, next question is from Hawks fan Matt Mann, and he asks, how much do you care, or maybe try not to care, about what the national media says about the Seahawks? It's a good question, Matt. I think I'm like most fans. I do care what the national media says because it helps to understand what the assumptions are out there about the Seahawks. And generally speaking, I want to know what the national media is thinking about the Seahawks, because then I can see where they're wrong and provide some clarity about where there's just bad information or misinformation out there about our team. But there's also the piece where national media has connections and sources that local media does not have. And there's news there at times that is more valuable than the local beat reporters have, because they don't have necessarily the same sources or get the same access, because the team or agents want to leverage the larger reach of these national reporters for their own purposes. And so they also then provide information that they don't provide other people. So I don't think it's all bad. I just generally, I mean, you remember when we had Robert Mays on the show, and Robert Mays stands out because, and he talked about this, that fans are really smart now, and you can't really fake it coming into a local market and trying to act like you know about this team. And the vast majority of national folks do exactly that. They do very superficial overview. They read a few things and they kind of talk at that level. Mays was a guy who really gets to depth, and he knew a lot about the Seahawks. And I was texting with him actually this weekend about the Bears and Shane Waldron and a couple thoughts I had for him, but he knows his stuff. And so that those guys stand out. And so there are some of those national guys that are evolving that are really actually getting to new depth compared to what's been the classic national media guys. or gals. And I always try to follow those folks. I mean, I thought Peter King for many years did a really, really good job. He was not always right, but I thought he had mostly like very thoughtful information and takes and good sources. And I was fortunate enough to meet him and talk to him one year at one of the charity events. And he's a very nice guy, down to earth, and so I respect him that way as well. And there's an interesting thing with national guys. Sometimes it's just a beauty contest, or relationships. Who knows? Nepotism. Who knows who? But there is something to be said for a vetting process of the best of the best rise to the top. And Peter King's a good example of that, where he just was very, very good at what he did. And that's why I think Mike Sando became a national guy, because he's that good. And I could see that coming for Brady Henderson at some point. Like, I think he's very good. So yeah, I think it depends on the national media person in general, but that's like, if we're talking like the Cowherd thing, we did a show about that. Colin's not the worst, but he's not great, and he's very just a lot of the stuff's clickbaity, and so you just gotta know what you're engaging with. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that I do pay attention, and specifically, I kind of love it when they have a really negative take on the Seahawks. That always gets me fired up. So thank you for the question, Matt. Next question comes from Troy Fagan. He asks, if Byron Murphy becomes an all-pro, but no other one of this year's draft picks hit, would you consider this draft successful? Alternatively, if someone other than Murphy becomes an all-pro, but Murphy never lives up to expectation, is that a successful draft? That is a fantastic question, Troy. And I want to see if I can find an article I wrote many years ago about dynasties and drafts. And I did research on some of the past dynasties, the 49ers, the 80s 49ers, the 90s Cowboys. Let me see if I've got this here. Is it still? Oh, I think maybe what I did is I published it in a different format. Darn it. Let's see if I can find anything else. The reason I'm looking for that is because I did research, and I'm actually going to go back and I'll just do this real time, and we'll do this real time. If you look at the 49ers draft history in the 80s, it was wild how many years in a row they would draft an all-pro level player. Let me just do this really quick. So 49ers in 1979 drafted Joe Montana, Hall of Famer. Okay. They also drafted in that same draft Dwight Clark, interestingly, in round 10. So back when they had many more rounds to the draft. So that's two all pros, one Hall of Famer in the same draft. Okay. Next year, they drafted Keena Turner, a linebacker who was a Pro Bowler. So they didn't have any all pros, but they had a Pro Bowler. So that's 2 years in a row of at least having one Pro Bowler. 1981, they drafted Ronnie Lott, a Hall of Famer, Eric Wright, a cornerback, defensive back who was an all-pro, as well as Carlton Williamson, another defensive back who had multiple Pro Bowls. So 3 Pro Bowl or greater and 2 all-pros. Okay, so now you got three years in a row of drafting at least one Pro Bowler. Then in 1982, I think this was a strike-related year, they drafted Bubba Harris in the second round. He started for them for 7 years. He never made a Pro Bowl. I thought he was that level, but he was not. So that was not their best. But then you go from there, 1983, Roger Craig, the running back, he was an all-pro. as well as Jesse Sapolu, the center. He made multiple Pro Bowls. So that's another 2 Pro Bowlers in that draft. 1984, they drafted Guy McIntyre, who was a guard. He made 5 Pro Bowls. Michael Carter, a nose tackle. He was an all-pro, made multiple Pro Bowls. So that's another draft with 2 Pro Bowlers. Then in 85, they drafted Jerry Rice, if you heard of him, Hall of Famer. 86, they drafted John Taylor, wide receiver, made multiple Pro Bowls. They drafted Charles Haley, made the Hall of Fame, multiple All-Pros. Steve Wallace, a tackle who made Pro Bowls. 1987, they drafted Harris Barton, a tackle who made multiple All-Pros. 1988, they drafted Pierce Holt, a defensive end, and Bill Romanowski, linebacker. They both made Pro Bowls. 1989, they drafted Wesley Walls, the tight end. He made 5 Pro Bowls. 1990, they drafted Eric Davis, the defensive back. He became an All-Pro, multi-time Pro Bowler. I'm still going here. 1991, they drafted Ted Washington, the nose tackle, and Merton Hanks, a defensive back. Both of them became All-Pros. And so that they did that all the way up. And I could honestly, in 1992, they did not draft any Pro Bowlers or All-Pros. So that broke what was a pretty long streak at that point. They came back in 93. They drafted Dana Stubblefield, who was an All-Pro. They drafted Bryant Young in 94, who was an All-Pro. So this is when you say the reason I'm coming to the 49ers, when your question was about the Seahawks in this draft class, is my conclusion when I was looking through this draft history of the 49ers is if you can come out of a draft with multiple Pro Bowl players, it's a successful draft. That's just generally speaking, if you're adding a couple Pro Bowl level players in a draft class, it's a successful draft. Similarly, if you draft one All-Pro, I would generally consider that a successful draft. Like if you come back here, 1985 for the 49ers, they drafted Jerry Rice and a bunch of nobodies. Was that a successful draft? Yeah, it was. I could go through a couple of these others. I mean, here's a good test for that. In 1983, they drafted Roger Craig. He was an All-Pro, but he was a running back. Was that a successful draft? I don't know. I mean, in the 80s, maybe the running back position was valued differently, but I don't know that I would consider that a massively successful draft. They did have Jesse Sapolu in that same draft, who was a 10-year starter. They had Ricky Ellison, a linebacker, who was an 8-year starter. So overall, that was probably a successful draft. But yeah, I go through some of these 49ers drafts in the 80s, and I see one All-Pro, and I'm like, yeah, that's arguably a successful draft. I think if Byron Murphy becomes an All-Pro player, it will be hard for this draft to not be, it will be a success. I think the question I asked Jeff Simmons after this year's draft is, this feels like what was like the 2015, 2016 Seahawks draft where they drafted Tyler Lockett and Frank Clark. Both of those guys became Pro Bowl players. Even though the rest of the class wasn't good, was that a good draft? And everyone was like, oh, John Schneider hasn't had a good draft for a decade. I'm like, well, even back then, I was like, I think that was a successful draft. I think Frank Clark and Tyler Lockett were difference-making players. You got 2 of them, one on each side of the ball at important positions. I think that was a successful draft. If you could get 2 players of those quality every draft, you'd be building up quite the team. So yeah, I do think if Byron Murphy is an All-Pro, that this would be a successful draft. I think if the other part of the question from Troy was if someone else other than Murphy becomes an All-Pro, but Murphy never becomes an All-Pro or never lives up to his expectations, would it be successful? It depends on who. I think Christian Haynes, if he were to become an all-pro, that would be a really big deal, and I think that would be very successful and very valuable. If Tyrese Knight becomes an all-pro, yeah, it's probably still probably successful. Off-ball linebacker pushes it for me a little bit in terms of positional value. The cornerbacks that they drafted, if one of them becomes an all-pro, probably, I think generally I would say yes. And Michael Jarrell, the tackle, if he becomes an all-pro, yes. I mean, an all-pro tackle or guard we already talked about with Christian Haynes. So, yeah, I think there's paths there. You clearly want to add more than one great player if you can. But I think let me just put it this way. Let me go back to the Seahawks draft history. When's the last time the Seahawks drafted an all-pro positional player? Anyone want to guess? The last year the Seahawks drafted a positional player who became an all-pro. Not Michael Dixon. Doesn't count. We're not talking about Michael Dixon in 2018. When's the last time they drafted an all-pro player? It was 2015. Tyler Lockett was an all-pro player. And so it's been a decade. You want to know why the Seahawks are a mediocre team? They haven't added elite talent in a decade through the draft. That is not the way you become a difference-making team. Now, they have added Pro Bowlers in their last two drafts. Devin Witherspoon made Pro Bowls his rookie year. Tariq Woolen made Pro Bowl as in his rookie year. DK Metcalf in 2019. He has made a couple of Pro Bowls. But you can see the difference between a Pro Bowl level player and an all-pro. As much as, Tyler Lockett's an all-timer for the Seahawks. But honestly, I could go even back farther or further. The last time the Seahawks really drafted one of the best players in the NFL was 2012 when they drafted Bobby Wagner and Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson, by the way, has never made a first-team all-pro. Bobby Wagner's made 6. It's been a long time since they drafted a player who was one of the top 3 to 4 at their position in the entire NFL. So it's a big deal. The Seahawks need to not just get okay guys, they need to get great players. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful about this draft in that way, especially with Byron Murphy. All right, great question. Thank you for that. Gargom asks, there's been talk again about Jamal Adams coming back to Seattle at a different position and probably at the vet minimum. Would you like having him back for depth? And would it bother you that someone who hasn't been able to stay healthy the last few years would be taking a spot on the 53 from young talent? Yeah, Gar, I'm pretty indifferent on the Jamal Adams thing. And I think part of it is because I don't feel baggage about the deal. I know he had the social media stuff, the yikes things with the reporter's wife. And he's done some pretty ugly things. And I get that. So I'm just kind of setting some of that stuff aside and just talking about him as a football player and the team in general. One, what's at stake this year for the Seahawks? I don't think a ring's at stake. So I don't know that it's a big risk to bring a player aboard that may or may not work out. This is not a year where I'm like, oh my God, no, don't put too much pressure on that or put too much eggs in that basket. That's not the right place to do it. And it's gonna break under pressure. If they want him back and they're interested, fine. I honestly, it's kind of a boring answer, but I just don't care that much. I don't think he's that relevant. I don't think that he's going to turn into something great. I don't think that they have almost anything behind their starters in the linebacker room. And so if they deem that their best option is depth in that linebacker room, okay. I know that fans in general feel like he was a bad influence. I don't think players feel that way. I think players really like being around him and like the energy he brings. And despite some of the things I just mentioned about how he's behaved at times, I think a lot of folks see him as a pretty legit professional in terms of how he conducts his business, watching film, preparing for games, things like that. So, yeah, if I think to answer the last part of the question, would I worry about someone who can't stay healthy taking a spot on the 53 from a young player? If we had some young players at that position that I wanted to make sure we had a spot for, then yeah, I would be worried. Who are we worried about? John Radigan? Uh, I mean, I'm trying to think of even who else is. Oh, it's that guy from is it Montana? I gotta go back and find it because it's gonna bug me. Um, there's just not a lot of guys that are interesting at that position. Patrick O'Connell, yes, from Montana. I mean, fine. Uh, who else? Yeah, there's just not a lot of guys. So no, I guess I don't really care. I don't really care. I know that there's some folks that want to make a clean break. I get it, but for me, it's just not something that registers as a big deal. Appreciate the question though. And Derek Woods asked, you may have talked about this a bit, but what are your predictions for the 53-man roster, particularly on offense, especially the back of the skill positions and the O-line? How many running backs versus wide receivers versus tight ends will they keep and who? Well, Derek, that's going to be a whole episode. So, as much as I would love to answer your question, I'm going to ask you to be a little bit more patient than normally I would for a mailbag because I'll go into this. It might be tomorrow, it might be Monday, but I will go into my 53-man roster prediction as it currently stands and where I see some questions. I'm glad you're primed the pump, you're ready for that, and we will definitely talk more about it. I will make sure that I address your questions in that episode. So stay tuned. Thanks, Derek. Another question from Hawks fan Matt Man from the No Smoke Without Fire department. If the Seahawks do end up bringing Jamal back, does that not fly in the face of the team's proclamation about wanting the highest character players? Between Adams, DK's unchecked antics, Woolen's groin grab, Cigargate, the team's reported interest in Randy Gregory earlier this year. Should we be taking these types of team statements with a PR infused grain of salt? Like I just said, I don't think that the team or the players think of Jamal Adams as a low character player. I think fans and media think of him as a low character player. And I would be careful about assuming that fans and media are seeing things the right way, or at least have as much information about who the person is. In fact, in general, I would assume that fans and media probably know the least about who a person is. And imagine if you were to talk to Bills reporters when Marshawn Lynch came out of college, they would tell you that he was a bad apple and you would not want him on your team. And there were fans in Buffalo that would have said the same thing. Marshawn wasn't a big fan of the media either, and he made that clear. I don't think anyone in the Seahawks fan base would consider Marshawn Lynch a character issue. So I know they're not the same. I'm not saying Marshawn and Jamal are the same. I just would be really careful about assuming that Jamal Adams is a low character guy. Might be. I'm not saying he isn't. I don't assume that because The fact that he got into some tussles with media members, I got to tell you, a lot of media members are dicks. Like, they just are. And they poke at things. And not everybody is great about being able to have someone ask a question that annoys you or that is hurtful and not react. In fact, our general manager just had this exact same experience when I think it was Greg Bell asked about what's your long-term plan for the quarterback position. And John Schneider, despite trying to make it seem like he was joking around, he was pissed about that question. It was very obvious. So anyway, I don't see the Jamal Adams thing as nearly as big of a deal as I think a lot of folks do. And I would also just say I'm not sure, maybe you guys can point it out to me, but I'm not totally clear on where this proclamation about wanting only high character players came from. If they made that proclamation, I missed it. So point that out to me and maybe I can give my interpretation of that a little bit more. Even without having heard it or seen it, I will say there was a time this team said it would never there was a bright line it would not cross if any player had put their hands on a woman, and then they crossed it multiple times. So things are never as black and white as either the team or fans want them to be. I'm not referring to any specific media member, by the way. Honestly, that was not the case. I'm just talking in general. I've told you guys before, media members tend to be some of the biggest ego people you will meet around sports, bigger than the players, bigger than the coaches. And it's not all of them, but there is a pretty decent population. It's kind of odd. All right. Imani Waddell asks, name a retired Seahawk that would be a dream interview for you. What would you ask him? Let me think about that one. You guys should answer in chat too. Who would be your dream interview? My interview first certainly would be Matt Hasselbeck. I've been trying to get Matt. I've been shooting him messages for a while. We've chatted on Twitter a couple times, but never gotten enough traction to where I can get him on the show. I just have a ton of respect for him. So he would be one of them. I think Mike Holmgren would be another one that I'd love to talk to. I just have a lot of respect for the way Mike has approached coaching, and I've met Mike, but I haven't really had a chance to dive in with him. I think, what would I ask Matt Hasselbeck? That's a good question. The things that I would want to know about with Matt Hasselbeck, some of them are not about football. I am interested in his life as a husband and a father and the choices he's made about what he's done after football and how he balances, like, where he gets fulfillment in his life now as a post NFL guy that did not turn into coaching. And we forget, but Matt played as a backup into his like mid 30s. I want to say he was like 36 even maybe when he retired. So he had a long career in the NFL, and then he did media stuff, and he still does some media stuff, but not a lot. And so I'm just kind of curious how this is a guy I've always thought had a really good head on his shoulders, kind of knew what mattered in life. And I would be interested in talking to him about his philosophy about that. And there'd definitely be some football things that I would talk to him about. I will forever. I think one of the things I'd probably talk to him about is we're going to take the ball and we'll take the ball and we're going to score issue moment where the narrative for his career almost was defined there for a lot of casual fans or people, even casual Seahawks fans. And they think about that as kind of a joke. Like, this guy was cocky and look what happened. I loved that moment. To me, it was one of the most inspiring moments a Seahawks player has ever had the courage to create. And it was not Matt that blew that moment. It was Alex Bannister who ran the wrong route and ran it too deep, did not adjust for the hot read, and was the reason that got picked off. So I'd want to ask Matt, does it still bother you, or did it ever bother you that your career's kind of got this message around it or this stigma around it that really wasn't even your fault? And I don't know how I would want to phrase it in a way that was less triggery and get more of an insightful answer, but I'd probably ask him about that as well. I see someone saying Golden Tate would be fun. We had Golden Tate. Watch episode 300. Go back and watch episode 300. He was on for a long time. Bobby Wagner was on with us. Golden was interviewing Bobby Wagner on our show. So go back and check that out. All right. We got a super chat. Get that in here. Concierge with Nolan asks, sorry I had to jump off for a few minutes. Any thought or discussion or conversation to linebacker of Draymont Jones or the dude from Houston? I assume the dude from Houston you're talking about is Nelson Caesar, the undrafted free agent. If it's somebody else, let me know. But yeah, let's talk about Draymont Jones because that is some news. It was reported that I think is it like Hawks Mania or something? I can't remember what the Twitter account is, but he mentioned that the trainer for Draymont Jones said that they were training Draymont to play outside linebacker. The implication there would be that he would be cutting weight to do that. And so that's where this conversion to linebacker question comes from Nolan and from others. And, I saw reaction online. People just immediately just like being annoyed about it. I think C Mike Spin Move was like, just trade him already. They're not going to trade him. It's not going to happen. Evan keeps saying, look, just trade him. No, they're not going to. It's not going to happen. I'm guaranteeing you, they are not going to trade him. He is 1 year into a massive deal, and he was not a terrible player last year. He wasn't a $17.5 million a year player last year, but he was not a terrible player. He just wasn't $17.5 million worth. So the idea that the Seahawks would take a dead money hit 1 year after signing a guy who played reasonably well, but also maybe was not utilized as best as possible, after they bring in a new coach who the personnel department, including the GM, hired because he wants his coaches to take better advantage of his talent, makes zero sense to me. It would be shocking to me if he gets moved. So for me, go back to episode 1 of Hawk Blogger Mornings. When I walk you all through the Ravens roster, what did I talk to you about? I said, okay, notice this. It's similarly at Michigan when McDonald was there. The defensive ends were 300 pounds and above. These were not 290-pound dudes. This is a 3-4 defense. These are not your 4-3 defensive ends. These are not the Chris Clemens or the Michael Bennett's. Those aren't the guys. These are 300-plus pounds. They're essentially defensive tackles that play defensive end. Mike Morris at 300 pounds will be a defensive end. All right? Leonard Williams can play any 3 of those spots. Byron Murphy can play any 3 of the spots along the interior defensive line. Jaron Reed, similarly, I think can do that as well. But the idea that Draymont Jones putting on 20 pounds makes no sense to me. He is a speed to power kind of guy, and putting on 20 pounds, I don't think his frame's built for it. It never made sense. So I told you all, they either had 300-plus pound defensive ends or 270 and lighter, and really 266 and lighter outside linebackers. Jadeveon Clowney was as big as they got on outside linebacker last year, and he was like 266 pounds last year. So I think it always made more sense to me that they would cut some weight for Draymont Jones and ask him to play. We also heard hints about this. The personnel guys, when they did their press conference, said, "Oh yeah, where the coaching staff's excited about the flexibility of Draymont Jones to play all along the line, all the way out to 9 technique, which is end, like it's outside the tackle." But that was the emphasis. We've heard it again. They talked about how Draymont Jones can be used. So he's going to be here. He's going to get used. He's going to be an edge player, and he'll be fine. Like Draymont Jones, let's pull up some stuff about him from last year, just to take a quick perusal. And first, let's just look at him relative to other people in the Seahawks. But before I even look at these, I will just say my expectation is Draymont Jones is a guy that will be able to set the edge. He's a physical player. He'll be able to set the edge against the run, which is good because at this point, you've got Uchenna Nwosu and Boye Mafe as the only guys that have that ability on the edge or have shown that ability. Derek Hall has not yet really shown that. He hasn't been terrible, but he hasn't been great. And we know Darrell Taylor has not done that. So he can be a strong edge defender and really help on the run. And he also is he's a decent pass rusher. And in the right situation, if he's doing the right twists and stunts with interior guys, or depending on what he's set up for, I think the biggest question I'd have for Draymond Jones is just if they ask out into a zone or into some sort of coverage, I don't know if he's really ready for that. And that's my guess is the most of what the training is about. But if I were to talk to you about defense, Draymond Jones was a 61.7 grade last year and on PFF. And the funny thing is, the 2 years before that in Denver, he was 51.8 and then 57.8. So by PFF's perspective, he actually played better last year than he had in Denver when he was one of the hotter free agents. The reason he was a hotter free agent is he was an interior player. This is part of the concern that people have. That was a good pass rusher. He was always an above average pass rusher. He had 40 or more pressures in his last 2 seasons in Denver as an largely interior player. But he had 43 pressures last year in Seattle. He had over 40 pressures and he had 5 sacks. So I don't think that that's like some terrible player that everyone needs to freak out about. And here's the other thing. We're going to do this too, because now you guys got me all riled up. If we go and we look by position and we look after Mr. Jones transitioned to play edge last year. This was after Leonard Williams was acquired. So this was week 10 was the first time that Draymond Jones started playing edge. All right. From week 10 on, 10, 11, 12. This takes a little time sometimes. Let me see if I can get this showing. Okay. From week 10 on, it's even going to show up under this. He might not show up. They might have him classified as an interior player. Yeah, I think they have him. Let's see if I'm going to have to put him as interior. That's unfortunate because I won't get as clean of a look. Let's see. Draymond Jones. Okay. So from week 10 on, once he started playing the edge position, his PFF grade was 71.9. His run defense grade from there was 77. His tackling was 78. His pass rush even improved to 67.8. His coverage was 42.1. So he was not a good coverage player, which is kind of understandable at 280 pounds. but this is a good player. And so let's remember 71.9. Let me see if I can pull out the other interior guys. 71.9. That's the number we're trying to remember. He would have ranked above Calais Campbell among edge players during that span. He would have ranked above Brandon Graham. He would have ranked above Hassan Reddick, above Kyle Van Noy. Odafe Owe from Baltimore, ranked above him, above Kayvon Thibodeau, who had a ton of sacks and was productive. So I don't think that it's crazy. I mean, Will Anderson, rookie of the year, was 75.1 as an edge player. And you're talking about Draymont Jones being 71.9. I mean, he's right there. He's right there. So I think there's a real mischaracterized narrative there about Draymont Jones. And once he was an edge player, he was a good player for the Seahawks last year. So I think he's part of the solution for now. I don't know if he's going to be part of this team beyond this year. And I think they have an out, but the combination of him being a good player, having a place that he can help, and them having contractual obligations to him, to me, make it very clear that he's going to stick around. And I'm super supportive of him being coming out as an edge. I have zero problems with it. And I think people that are like Griff that are all upset about it are wasting energy on those feelings. Okay. If you wanted more information about Nelson Caesar, I did a whole undrafted free agents episode. I go into some depth about Nelson Caesar, and you feel free to go back and find that. And it's only, I think, earlier this week. I think it was Thursday, potentially, that I did the undrafted. Maybe it was Wednesday. It was Wednesday morning. I did the undrafted free agents, but you can find that on the channel. And I went through each one of the undrafteds. Okay, let's keep going. All right. Nick asks, which later round rookie is most likely to take a starting job at some point during the regular season? Later round rookie. Let's see. I mean, it depends on what you mean by later round. I mean, AJ Barner, I think, is going to be. He could definitely get a bunch of snaps. I am not going in believing that Nehemiah Pritchett has almost any chance of getting snaps, a starting job especially. I do think that Laumea is a reasonable bet here, either at guard or swing tackle, but probably guard. And I think Michael Jarrell is also early good returns on Michael Jarrell. And keep in mind, part of the reason that he was so low on the consensus draft board is that he played at Findlay and he was so dominant against the opponents. People just felt like the tape almost was irrelevant because the level of competition was not great. So if he goes in and against NFL level competition and training camp and OTAs and all this other stuff, if he's getting good reviews, that is a very good sign because the guy is a great athlete. He's a smart guy. You saw the interview on my show with him. That could end up being, he could end up absolutely being better than their earlier 6th-round pick in Laumea. But we'll see. Like either one of those guys could end up getting starter snaps, either by injury or other. And the other guy to watch is DJ James. I talked about him yesterday on the cornerback show. Guy ran a 4.28. He's 6 feet tall. He's got an interesting skill set at nickel. And I could see him ascending. He's got some of the same tightness issues and lack of mobility, agility issues that Kobe Bryant has, and Kobe Bryant did struggle at the nickel position. Yes, he had the forced fumbles, but as far as coverage goes, he was not great as a rookie, and he's been converted to safety. So I'm not positive that GJ James will stick at nickel, but I think he's a guy that is one that could as well. So those are, I think of all those guys, kind of bullish on Jarrell. I think that could be one that we could see the story develop of, oh, it wasn't just the level of competition. He's just dominant, and we want to get him in there. So that's a guy to watch. Good question, Nick. Chris Bailey asks, with Bobby and Diggs not on the roster, who do you think will be the defensive captain this year? I would bet it's going to be Uchenna Nwosu. Either him or Leonard Williams are, I think, probably the best bets. Julian Love would be the other guy. One of those three would make the most sense to me. Eric asks, in your opinion, what will a successful season look like for both the players and the coaching staff? Success really this year is independent of players or coaching staff. It's an amalgamation of all of it. It is that there is some core foundation that is built that has the potential to stay a foundation long enough for the team to be able to build on top of it with additional players and additional value and additional time. That could look like, all right, they have got a really great pass rush. Their pass rush is just, it's an issue for other teams. Maybe their run defense is still a problem, but their pass rush is really good. It could be that their run defense is rock solid. It's one of the best, and it looks like it's sustainable. But an issue there is like, is it the best? Is it John Hankins is part of that, and he's a one-year guy? Part of what I'm looking for is something that coalesces that can last and is not highly dependent on guys that are only here for a year. So I want to see something like that. It could be on offense. It could be that Ryan Grubb accentuates the talent on offense better than the guys that we've had in the past. I think there's a real chance that could happen. It could be that the offensive line coalesces and looks like, okay, we've got guys we have at least one guy, maybe two, that have Pro Bowl potential that are coming together. And there's a lot of ways this season could be successful in that regard. That is so much more important than the wins. I will absolutely hate losing. I will love winning. All that stuff will still be the case. But when I'll be able to take a step back and take a breath, what I'll be looking for is there something repeatable and sustainable being built here? And that has to be a combination of the coaching and the talent and the contracts. So that's like what I'm looking for. And what you saw in, the earlier Seahawks that went to a Super Bowl is they did create a real strength. The offensive line, Hutch and Walter Jones and Robbie Tobeck and that crew were together for a little while. And that stepping stool allowed players like Sean Alexander to be, added in. It allowed players like Matt Hasselbeck to start to blossom. It allowed, Joe Juravicius to be a complementary piece in the passing game and part of the blocking group. It allowed some of those other things to be built, and the defense just was complementary. Similarly, in the 2013 run up, you kind of started with, okay, that secondary. It really started with the secondary. Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor in 2010. Cam became a starter in 2011, and then you added Richard Sherman and Brandon Browner, and all of a sudden you had this foundation. And then ultimately you just needed those finishing pieces, which were Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill, really put that team over the top from 2012 to 2013. So We need to find that. And the Seahawks do not have that right now. They just don't. That's what success is for me, is building that type of foundation. All right, folks, that was all the questions. I want to thank everybody for your questions today. Let me just double check if anything else got posted while I was doing that. I think not, which is great. I appreciate the super chat. I appreciate folks tuning in, and I appreciate all of you for supporting. So if you haven't already, give this show a like and click subscribe. Join as a YouTube member. The link is in the chat, and it's also in the description of the video, and become a patron. Patreon.com/hawkblogger. I'm about to go put the audio version of this podcast up for patrons. Patreon.com/hawkblogger. You can find it there. Until tomorrow, have a great rest of your night. Have a happy Mother's Day. I will be trying to do a show tomorrow. We're going to the Mariners game. That was, well, my wife actually asked to go see the Mariners, which is crazy, but we're going to do that for Mother's Day. And I'll try to find time to do another show tomorrow, keep the streak going. And if for whatever reason I don't see you all, have a great Mother's Day, have a great weekend, and enjoy the rest of your night. I'm Brian Nemhauser. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings.